So as the coronavirus continues to spread, governments around the world are implementing tougher restrictions to contain it. Let's take a little look at some of the ways that different countries are dealing with this particular outbreak. First up, let's turn to Japan, because schools will be closed from the start of next week there. Now let's take a look at a scene from Iran. This is a country which is banning Chinese citizens from entering. Let's go over to Saudi Arabia, where the government is also taking measures. It is suspending visas for pilgrims who want to visit holy sites in places like Mecca and Medina. And now, just take a look at what is happening in Venice. Look how quiet the streets are there. 11 nearby towns in northern Italy are still in lockdown. So some countries are really stepping up their efforts to contain the virus. Here's the Director General of the World Health Organization.
The epidemics in the Islamic Republic of Iran, Italy, and the Republic of Korea demonstrate what this virus is capable of. But this virus is not influenza. With the right measures, it can be contained.
But the WHO is concerned that some milder cases of the virus are simply not being detected, and that's particularly the case in Iran. Authorities there say that there have been 26 deaths out of 245 cases. That means that's a fatality rate of around 10%, and that is significantly worse than the death rate elsewhere, which varies from between around 1 to 3%. Here's the WHO on this particular aspect.
This disease came unseen and undetected into Iran, so the extent of infection may be broader, and what we may be seeing, as is the case in many epidemics when they start, is you only see the severe end of the spectrum, and then as you do more surveillance you find more mild cases.
Now, even so, those mild cases are being picked up, and this is one woman amongst them. Her case is really worth noting because she is Masoumeh Ebtekar. She's one of Iran's vice presidents. And just to stress that her case is mild, but it goes to show that the virus doesn't discriminate, whatever your position is. It follows positive tests for the country's deputy health minister and also a member of parliament in Iran. Here's the view from an expert on Iranian public affairs.
I think the first thing to recognize is that the government, official statements probably do not reflect the extent of the outbreak inside of Iran. I think Iran is likely, based on the death rate, probably the second biggest epicenter in the entire world when it comes to the coronavirus. And that's due to two factors. One, a very slow government response, failing to test for the coronavirus initially, and then failing to take quarantine and other precautionary measures. And then second, its public health sector has been devastated by U.S. sanctions for months and years, and so they haven't been able to get key medical devices and then key medicine that's only manufactured in the West. So this has kind of created a perfect storm where, the official rate of infection is in the hundreds, but based on the death rate, it's likely in the thousands. And you've seen many government officials come out, and not just the vice president that you mentioned, but also members of parliament and the deputy health minister who's supposed to be leading the response to this crisis.
So how much trust is there in what the Iranian authorities are telling members of the public?
I don't think there's a lot of trust, and you see that because doctors have come out and said that official government statements don't really reflect the extent of the crisis, that this is much more widespread than they're letting on. And, back on February 18th, they said that nobody had been infected in the country. The government had to reverse themselves, the very next day because a couple of people had died as a result of the coronavirus. So, I think the public trust in the authorities, and then dating back to, the fact that they shot down a civilian aircraft just a little over a month ago and then lied about it for 3 days, public trust is very, very low when it comes to the Iranian government's pronouncements on this.
The situation in Iran. So are governments responding proportionately to the threat of the coronavirus? Well, Japan has recorded more than 200 cases. In Italy, that figure, well, as you can see, it's risen to more than 650. What about Saudi Arabia? It's also implementing tough new measures, but this, in fact, is the number of recorded cases there. Zero. So the Saudis are being extremely cautious. Other countries also implementing more targeted measures. For example, here in the UK, there have been just 15 recorded cases so far, but the most recent cases have been traced back to Italy, and so far 8 schools thought to be at risk have closed as a result. Here's one public health specialist on the choice that governments must face.
I think the judgment that governments of countries will be making at the moment is it worth the social and economic cost of attempting large-scale quarantine measures, restrictions on movement, banning public gatherings, suspending public transport? Is that going to be worth the social and economic cost for the benefits that are obtained?
Now, Italy is also worried about causing unnecessary concern over the coronavirus. The Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, says that it has to stop the panic. He is asking national broadcasters to tone down their reporting on the number of cases. And so far, it feels that they have, in fact, complied. Coronavirus no longer the top line in Italian media. Our correspondent, Bethany Bell, is in Milan for us.
Italy's Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio said that there was what he called an infodemic of misleading news about Italy that was bad for its reputation and for its economy. And he said while it was important not to minimise the seriousness of what was going on in terms of the virus, he said it was something that was affecting a tiny percentage of Italy's population.
Now, the Italian government is trying to avoid a situation like this. This photo was taken by the journalist Cristian Gerasem, and this isn't in Italy, this is in Romania, and it shows those supermarket shelves completely emptied by panic buyers trying to stock up. And that's despite the country only recording its first case of the virus today. Many Romanians, in fact, do work in Italy. They move across the border frequently. There are also continuing reports of people of Chinese descent or of Asian appearance more generally facing prejudice in Western countries from people fearing, and I have to stress, without any reason to back it up, that they could have the virus. The UN has been speaking about that particular issue today.
The coronavirus epidemic has set off a disturbing wave of prejudice against people of Chinese and East Asian ethnicity. And I call on member states to do their most to combat this and other forms of discrimination.
And there are some particularly concerning reports regarding that coming out of Russia. Here's Vitaly Shevchenko from the BBC's Russian service.
The Chinese embassy in Moscow has complained that Chinese nationals are being targeted by police and transport workers looking for coronavirus cases in the Russian capital. The embassy sent a letter to the Moscow city administration saying that no other country, not even the US, does anything like the special monitoring of Chinese nationals on public transport. This follows reports that bus drivers in Moscow had been told to report passengers that look Chinese. Russia has banned Chinese citizens from entering its territory amid coronavirus fears, and the Moscow mayor has said that strict raids and face recognition systems would be used to enforce a 2-week quarantine of all arrivals from China. Responding to the letter from the Chinese embassy, Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin said that the measures were necessary and non-discriminatory.
Now, one country that does say that it is prepared is the United States. They have 60 cases so far, although most of those, of course, do stem from the Diamond Princess cruise ship. You'll recall that story that we covered recently. President Trump has appointed the Vice President Mike Pence to lead America's response. And this was, in fact, Mr. Pence arriving at the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington. He'll be chairing a meeting of the Coronavirus Task Force. Here's some of his opening remarks.
In the days ahead, we're going to make sure that the full resources of the federal government continue to be brought to bear in confronting the coronavirus here at home. And I look forward to your recommendations and to your counsel and to being able to carry those recommendations to the President as we continue to deal with this issue.
So, our government's getting the balance right between caution and conservatism. Here's our diplomatic correspondent, James Robbins.
The World Health Organization would make the point that it's pleased that many countries, most countries, have been following its advice, and that containment is going on at a particularly high level in countries where there are the highest number of cases. That's what you'd expect. And they believe that most governments are striking the right balance between concern and something which the WHO obviously wants to avoid, which is panic.